Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's talk by Carolina Caycedo, which is part of the 2021-2022 Visiting Speaker Series hosted by the Department of Visual Arts here at UCSD and is supported by the Brutten Family Foundation. My name is Janelle Iglesias. I am an assistant professor here in the Department of Visual Arts and a member of our visiting speaker committee, where I've been working alongside Paul Sepuya, Associate Professor Paul Sepuya, and Associate Professor Pinar Yoldaş. On behalf of the committee, I really wanted to first thank everyone behind the scenes who helped coordinate this series, including Nick, Laura, Yulia, Paolo, and Lucas. And now I would like, with much privilege and much pleasure, to introduce our speaker today, Carolina Caycedo. Carolina is a Colombian, London-born, multidisciplinary artist known for her performances, videos, artist books, sculptures, and installations that examine environmental and social issues. Her work contributes to the construction of environmental historical memory as a fundamental element for the non-repetition of violence against human and non-human entities. I'm particularly inspired by what Luis Burri describes as the grace with which Caycedo's work confronts injustice, as well as its insistence on beauty and joy in the face of colonialist environmental harms. With courage and imagination, her work models how damaged parts of the world can be rebuilt and reconceived. That's from a 2020 interview. There are too many amazing things to say about Carolina's biography, honestly, but I just wanted to mention that she is a 2021-2022 inaugural U.S. Latinx Artist Fellow, super exciting, and a 2020-2022 Borderlands Fellow at the Center for Imagination in the Borderlands at ASU and the Vera Center for Arts and Politics at the New School. Carolina is extremely busy these days, so we are very thankful for your time and for being here today to share your practice with us. Thank you so much, Carolina.
Thank you, Janelle, and also thanks Paul and Paolo for the logistics and Paul for the initial invitation. And yeah, thanks for everyone who's connected in this Friday afternoon. So I'm speaking from my studio, which is on unceded Tongva land, also known as Chinatown in Los Angeles. And I want to thank the Tongva original people of this land for hosting me in their unceded land. And with that said, I'm going to share my screen and start here with this slide. So I'm going to focus on a couple of bodies of work, starting with this one that I call Be Damned, which plays with the word to damn, like to curse something or someone, and to dam a river, to hold the waters back. And Be Damned is a project that started in 2012, precisely in this territory that you're seeing in the images. It's a department or state in southern Colombia called Huila, where the most important river of our country, Yuma or Magdalena River, which is a colonizer name, is born, and where a couple of large hydroelectric dams have been constructed in the first one in the late 80s, and the second one, which was my first case study for the Be Dam project, started generating electricity in 2016. The construction started, or kind of the environmental license was granted in 2009, and then electricity started being generated in 2016. But these two dams are part of a major master plan for development of the Magdalena River, which actually entails 17 dams on its upper and middle bodies. And these images here are the site of one of those dams that are planned. This would be the Oporapa Dam, and it's kind of the third one in the construction plan that entails basically transforming the upper and middle body of the river into a hydroelectric kind of power source, and then dredging the lower part of the river for large-scale boats to come in and be loaded with oil, coal, and other minerals that are being extracted. And so the B Dam really started as a number of events and actions on the riverbank itself with the communities who are resisting and fighting and struggling against these dams and this kind of international capital encroachment and privatization of the river. And me kind of aligning myself with their struggle and kind of offering some of the skills I have as an artist to support their agendas of, claiming for proper compensation once the dam has been built, and then trying to stop the construction of the other dams on that master plan. And so these are some of the kind of strategies and tactics we came up with the community itself, like these kind of very joyful, playful meetings where we always cook huge sancochos. Sancochos is a very traditional Latin American dish. It's like a huge soup that has plantain, cassava, all sorts of meats. Normally people would bring something, every family would bring something to put into the pot. And that meant that there was always a plate coming out of the pot for everyone in attendance. There would be, kind of these rounds of meetings and presentations and sharing of ideas and building strategies moving forward. And then we would kind of end also with kind of these sort of gestures that I call geochoreographies. So these kind of gestures and happenings, writing with our own bodies, these messages of resistance on the riverbank itself, kind of hacking the view from above, right? This view of the drone, this view of the bombarder, this view of the satellite kind of photograph that investors use to analyze and to decide without proper consultation where the next dam is going to be plopped, where the next mine is going to be plopped, right? So challenging also ideas of landscape and ideas of or kind of perspectives from the position of power, this view from above. These are some other images of some of the actions. Here, Ríos Vivos means living rivers. This actually is on the site where the Quimbo Dam was constructed. So this beautiful dry tropical forest that you see on the top of the image is gone. It was all cut. This pebble beach that you see here is under the reservoir. So also understanding how some of the images that we took and the actually documentations of some of these actions have become what I call environmental historical memory. So a trace and a documentation of how the territory used to look before the dam kind of changed and, kind of uprooted it completely. When I say territory, I use it in the way that we use it in Latin America. So sometimes I feel that in English, territory has a more militaristic kind of connotation, but in Latin America, we use the word territorio or territory to talk about all the intrinsic relationships that exist on the land. And it will be closer of how original people, indigenous native people here in North America use the word land. Land entails, yes, the land, the ground, but the river, the forest, the mountain too, and all the relationships that exist within the territory. So the physical, the emotional, spiritual, the political, economical, the cultural, relationships that build the ecosystem itself. This is another example of these geochoreographies that we done, like their collective performances or collective actions, I like to call them. This was done in Sao Paulo, in the Ibirapuera Park, where the Sao Paulo Biennial Pavilion is located. We actually took the photograph from the roof of that pavilion. And it marks a year of one of the worst environmental crimes that happened in Brazil when the mine tailing dam of Fundão in Mariana in Minas Gerais burst, killing 22 people and contaminating the whole Rio Doce River. So a lot of these actions have also been done as gestures of solidarity with folks who are, struggling and on the end of environmental injustice or, environmental crimes somewhere else, right? So some of them happen in the territory with the communities themselves, and some of them have happened and have been organized as gestures of solidarity, like this one. It says Aguas para a Vida, which in Portuguese, like a loose translation would be "water is life," mini wikoni, how we know it here in the States. And these kind of works, I don't have any interest in translating them into the white cube. They remain as these copyleft collective authorship images that can be used to illustrate posters, post on social media. Actually, this one, Aguas para Vida, I'm super proud because the movement of, it's called MAR, Movement of People Affected by Dams of Latin America, which is a coalition of different movements at a national level. So there's movements from Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Mexico, Guatemala, and they're kind of in a coalition of social grassroots movements called MAR. They published their first magazine, and they decided to use this one as a cover for that magazine. And I was super excited about that. So the work with these communities, of course, takes these shapes of these collective actions that really don't have translation into the white cube. You know, I share them in these contexts of talks, or they have been, again, used, you know, as the cover of magazines or posters or flyers for the community itself. But the work with the community also informs my formal decisions and decisions I take back in the studio in different ways. And this image I want to show you as, you know, to give an example of how those relationships of what I call spiritual field work inform then kind of my studio practice. So when I go out to the field to collect information and to do research, what we call field work, I denominate this process as a spiritual field work to kind of differentiate it from ethnographic or more scientific methodologies, where sometimes they're, you know, the expert, let's say, decides or positions themselves with distance, with an objective distance from their subject of study, right? And they're out in the field, kind of maintaining an objective distance, collecting this information. While when I'm out in the field doing field work, you know, the process is totally the contrary. I do field work to actually get closer to the communities, to the peoples, to a place, to a particular place, you know, so a particular place in the river. And I do spiritual field work, right? There's a spiritual component to it, because though there is a rigorous methodology of collecting information, having conversations, there's also a very affective one, you know, one of affectation, the affecto. So let's say of love, let's say, and of care, where I actually want to, you know, take advantage that I'm in that place, building these relationships to reinforce a long-term commitment with these struggles, and also to deepen those relationships that, you know, that build up through the process of collaboration and of supporting specific agendas. So one of the persons I've had a long relationship with is a woman called Soy Laninco. She's a fisherwoman from La Jagua, impacted by El Quimbo Dam. And in one of the conversations I had with her, she told me that she would go out and protest and always carry the Colombian flag upside down. And for those that you have been in direct action or in protest, this is a gesture used worldwide, that you carry the national flag upside down to, to vocalize in a visual way, you know, to say that you're not in accordance with government policy. And, you know, when I went back and I was editing a film called Land of Friends at that moment, that was back in 2014, I decided to flip the river upside down, and this image came about. This is the upper body of the Magdalena River, a particular location called the Strait of the Magdalena River. And I flipped it upside down to kind of, you know, kind of mimic and be in solidarity with Zoila's gesture, and also to express my disconformity with Colombian policy in terms of, you know, privatization and dam building on our rivers and our common goods that are rivers, right? And so this really opened a possibility for me in many levels. And in an intellectual, let's say, speculative one, I understood that a river that flows upwards cannot be dammed. But it also opened a possibility of cinematic language and visual language. And from there stemmed out a series that I call the water portraits. So already with these conversations with Soila and other people, I learned that rivers are not sites of extraction, which would be a more corporate or extractivist vision over this common good. But rivers, mountains, forests are considered kin, family. And you may be familiar with, our building kin, this text. But for them, it's family. And in some cases, rivers, you write specifically, are masculine or feminine. So they're called the pai, the father, or the mai, the mother, or their grandfather, like in the case of the Grenaki people in Minas Gerais, that they call the Rio Doce Watu, which means grandfather, right? So they're not always just the father or the mother. They have actually like different status depending of the community, or the river itself. And I started also understanding that this format of landscape, which is the given format that we learn in the academy as art practitioners, and that's the one that's mostly used to represent nature, right, has been a complicit format in the establishing of a colonial gaze, right, and a colonizing gaze too. So, as artists, we have been complicit in colonial processes, right? Through the building of this colonial gaze and the reinforcement of this colonial gaze through formats such as landscape. And, and when I flipped the river upside down, I'm just going to go back to it, right? I just started to see the river in a very different perspective, of course. But it allowed me also to start building a relationship with the river and, and kind of understanding what was my kin, my family relationship with that river started kind of, those threads started to build up. And so this series of water portraits developed. So this is an image of a 3-channel installation called Patron Mono. It's the portrait of the Cauca River in Colombia, kind of its golden heart. It's a river that carries a lot of gold in its sand. I thought I had more water portraits there. Okay, I will probably hit them later on. But just to say that, let's go back to the landscape format. And if you think about landscape, it's this horizontal window through which we look at nature, right? But as observers, we are positioned outside of that territory that we're representing or looking at, right? When the contrary, it's only the contrary. We're actually embedded in that set of relationships that builds up what we know as nature. We're totally, perhaps not in the middle or at the center of it, as the Anthropocene wants us to believe. We're definitely not at the center of those relationships, but we are an important part of those relationships that build up a territory, an ecosystem, or nature. And so that's why the format of portrait has been a much more useful one to me at the moment of building up images and representations of water and particular rivers with which I have built up relationships. I've also used precisely this image, like these perspectives from above, to challenge them precisely, to challenge what they mean and what they stand for. So I get hold of satellite imagery of different moments of the construction of the dam. So this is El Quimbo Dam in Colombia. At a moment of its construction. Here you can see the wall, the principal wall. You can see how a lot of sand and kind of material have been extracted from the riverbanks to actually build up the wall of the dam. And actually you can see here a mine operation. So the company had extracted a lot of gold without having permission, because there's a lot of gold in Colombian mountains. So it's interesting also how, when you access these resources as satellite images, you also start discovering stuff that's going on. And I incorporate these in my videos and also in these series of large murals, kind of where I mash them up. But I always share these satellite imagery with the communities that are affected. And it was interesting we sit down, look at the images together. And it was really interesting to see how they would start in strategizing, like, oh, like this is happening. This is definitely a gold extraction. Oh, this is a road we can access that we didn't know was there. So they start strategizing. They have this access to the site that, from a kind of standing point perspective, you don't have. So these large murals the intention of these large murals is actually to complexify our view over the territory and to present it as this layered and as this pluriverse. And this is a word that I borrow from the Colombian sociologist Arturo Escobar, who proposes the idea of pluriverse in contraposition to the idea of a universe, right? If we think about a universe, it's this universal singular truth, one perspective that dominates us all, right? Like the colonial kind of enterprise is based on this idea of a universe, right? Even modernism is based on this idea of a universe. But the truth is that we live in a pluriverse, and we're starting to waken up to these pluriversalities and to the strength in our differences, right? And to weave together our differences to become stronger also, and to understand that we're not minorities, but actually a majority. And these mashing up of these satellite views help me to present these pluriversal views over a specific territory, but also to demand more attention of the viewer, right? Because at the end, they're images that cannot be kind of digested with a single glance, but that demand time, that demand that the viewer gets closer and starts looking at the details in this mashup of images and discovering some of those big scars that extractivist projects leave over our lands. And this is an image of one of those large murals in the context of a show I had last year at the MCA Chicago, where you can actually see one of the water portraits here. The Serpent River book, which is an artist book publication that compiles information from 2012 to 2017. Some of the series called Cosmo Atarajas that I'll come in. But here we have the water portrait. So the water portraits, as I was saying, are portraits of specific parts and rivers, or specific kind of bends or waterfalls in specific bodies of water, or of bodies of water in general. They take the shape of or the form of film, but also of these very long printed fabrics. Cotton and silk is the substrate I use. And I always thought about fabric as a substrate to print these portraits of the river, because I always wanted to bring the portrait back into the river. And of course, if you put paper in river, it will be a mess. Also because the fabric allows me to kind of play with the way we install them, and I really like to think about my work that I like to produce work that's flexible and that can be adapted to different contexts, and that kind of surprises me every time we get it installed, right? So I like to make pieces that can change from exhibition to exhibition, that can adapt, that can take different shapes, or that can hang lower or higher. That can be activated. This is actually a water portrait from the San Gabriel River here in Southern California. So the last three ones I did back in 2019 were actually portraits of three rivers here in Southern California. Two rivers, the Santa Ana or Wanauna, which is the Hasheman name, and the San Gabriel River. And then we did a portrait also, particularly of the mouth of the Santa Ana River when it kisses the Pacific Ocean. And this is actually the Wanauna meets salty waters. And this is a silk print, so it has a kind of more transparency to it. The San Gabriel River. And then finally in 2019, we had a chance to use the prints and the water portraits to generate a connection with these local waters that are the waters that are sustaining me at this moment that I live here in Tongva land. And we had a chance to activate them with a group of collaborators, dancers and choreographers that have been working since 2017. And we've been developing like a set of more choreographic language together around water flow and containment. So here is the Serpent River book, which is an artist book that I mentioned before. It's a concertina or accordion fold that has a print that's mostly visual, this large collage, like meandering collage of images on its top part. Again, it's kind of like I was mentioning, it has the possibility of being shown over this custom-made table, kind of at a floor level or at a higher level, this table. This is kind of, it's more sculptural form when it's installed and kind of the way I propose. So the book has these kind of pleats that when you fold, allows this long concertina fold to start meandering. And it collects, here you can see Aguas para la Vida, it collects visual and written information of my spiritual fieldwork and of my research. So it also contains archived images collected in the span of 5 years. This was published in 2017. And the book kind of responds to the parts of a river. It has a source, an upper body, middle body, lower body, and a delta that responds to different perspectives that over the different perspectives you could have over a river. So responds to different epistemologies and forms of relating to a body of water. It starts with an indigenous Amazonian epistemology, continues to a more campesino or peasant. Then this is the part where the more corporate perspective is presented. And these are just like spreads. So you could see kind of this would be the pleat that folds, and kind of in this intersections, like other information is kind of embedded. The book looks to collapse different times and points of view over particular events. For example, this one is a satellite view of the collapsing of that mine tailing dam in Minas Gerais in Brazil. And in that pleat, in the interstice, is the embroidery of Iris, a woman who actually survived the toxic avalanche of mine tailings that came down the river. And in this embroidery, it's her perspective on the ground of what happened, right? The toxic mud coming, roaring through the river, through her town, the helicopter coming to rescue people out of the mud and whatnot. I wanted to make the book, let's jump here, to also produce something that would allow me to revise all this material, because a lot of time when your work is research based, you collect so much information, but what ends up transpiring in the final work doesn't show the amount of research and work and information you've collected over the years. So for me, it was an important way and mechanism and methodology to revise and collect and kind of put that information together. So as I said, the book, on the top part is this more visual collage, but on the lower part, and then you can access the book like a normal book, it's a collection of texts, some of them written by me, some of them texts that haven't been important during my research. For example, there's the 1921 poem by Langston Hughes, Inaugural Things of Rivers. There's also a poem by the Pueblo poet Leslie Marmon Silko, called The Sun Woman, or When the River Meets the Sun Woman. I think that's the title. Anyways, so I wanted to, kind of revise and put together all this information to be able to share it with the audience. But also I wanted to produce something beautiful, special, that I could bring back to the communities that that have taught me so much, that have generously hosted me, in the midst of their struggles. Also to not, to kind of not become also an extractivist artist, right? Because we also sometimes fall into extractivist procedures by coming into a community and taking images, filming, taking information, bringing it out into the world, and then, never coming back. Or seldom coming back. I always say that, in kind of socially engaged projects, we ought to add a return ticket item into the budget, right? So that actually the artists, allow themselves and budget into the project a possibility of returning and showing the results, the finished documentary, the finished film, the finished exhibition, or if you can't bring the piece because of logistics, at least come back and share. And so the book also was an excuse for me to come back and leave something, like one of those visits. And I continue to visit and be in conversation with these communities, but I wanted to have the opportunity of coming at least once without taking this time, but just leaving something as a token of gratitude. And this was, the book allowed me to do that. And it's really interesting because I left, so this is like a small run artist book. It's like 250 copies. Approximately 100 were left in different communities in Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, also in local libraries and whatnot. And the book is used to by the communities to tell their own stories, to feel connected to other communities in resistance of dams. So it has weaved together also a little, like somehow, a kind of Latin American communities resisting dams. We've also used a book, and this was actually the first collaboration with this group of choreographers and dancers, as a score for performances, as a kind of workshop tool to explore kind of more from a choreographic standpoint, movement and gestures. We've activated in the LACMA campus, where it was actually exhibited for the first time in 2017. So yeah, the book, I wanted to make a publication that was a book, that could be a sculpture, that could be a workshop resource, that can be read and accessed as a normal book. And I think about the book as a publication that is a kind of a main river in a number of publications. So now I'm actually late, but my idea of this publication is that other publications done in the future can connect to this one in the same way tributaries feed into a main body of water. So one of the biggest series that have come out of this project of BDAM are the Atarajas or cosmonets. The cast net, we call it Ataraja in Colombia. It comes from the Arab verb to throw, atarajar. And the cosmatarajas are basically made with handmade, artisanal, woven cast nets from the communities themselves. The first cast net I did was actually with a net that had been given to me by Zoila, precisely, the woman I talked about before. And I was just obsessed with the net, and I gave her I was such a pain in the ass that she said, just take the net. I give it to you, take it. And so I brought it back to the studio and really started playing with it, and kind of gave myself permission to feel pleasure and experiment with the net in the studio. Because the net, already stands for so many things. The net is, embodies food sovereignty, embodies economic autonomy. The net is a porous, malleable structure that catches the sustenance, but let the water flow through, right? In totally opposition of what the wall of a dam does, which is to actually cut the body of the water in two, cuts the cycles of fish reproduction, kind of, taken fish to the border of extinction, for example, like what's happening here in the Pacific Northwest with the salmon. The body or the wall of a dam is impermeable, impenetrable, corporate made, monumental, while the Ataraja is handmade, human scale. And if it breaks, and it normally breaks because the rivers are rough, sometimes you catch a stick or it's trapped a stone and some of the knots get loose, it doesn't compromise the functioning of the whole structure. It can be repaired. I always think, how lovely would it be that our society worked more as a fishing net instead of a wall of a dam. And so the cosmonets are very intuitive. I really allow myself, I dye them, I play with them, I hang stuff from them. They started kind of taking shape in the process. Like this one, for example, is a offering to the deity Oshun, which is the Yoruba deity of fresh water. She's always clad in yellow. She has a yellow mirror in her hands, and she is the one who provides a good fishing session, or allows for a good artisanal gold washing. And so these are some examples of the nets. This one is called To Drive Away Whiteness, and it's a net that I kind of dyed thinking about the colors of the sunset here in California, and then a string of like potions to drive away whiteness. This is an image of the installation at the Hammer outdoors. So this is called Big Woman, and it's again just playing with the net. Suddenly this shape and this woman kind of appeared to me, and I understood that she had been accompanying me in the studio for a number of years until finally she took shape. So the nets are kind of an element that allows me to experiment in a more sculptural and formal way. We've used it also with these collaborators to activate them, I guess, during performance. And I'm going to share a clip actually of one of those performances that happened at the Huntington Gardens Library and Art Museum 2018 when I was in residence there. So I'm going to play the clip. So the film was shot in the Huntington grounds. It's called Apparitions, and there's a lot of improvisation into it. Of course, we were following certain prompts that we have developed with the main choreographer, which is Marina Magallanes, this person. And the main prompt is that I wanted these dancers to think that they were apparitions, right? That they were these ghosts that have always been in the grounds of the Huntington, that actually helped build up the grounds of this collection and this fortune, and that are coming back to haunt and to embody pleasure, ritual, through gesture and through movement in the museum, in the gardens, in this overly constructed and modeled gardens, right? And one of the prompts was actually also to engage with the camera, this glare, this stare, this gaze back into the audience, right? Through the camera lens, of course, it was a performance for the camera, as a way to hold accountable these viewers, right? If you know a little bit about the Huntington, is one of the most expensive museums in the country. I think you have to pay like over $20 to go in, and it's mainly a white or upper class audience that so this idea of gaze, of returning the gaze, of holding the gaze, of engaging with the viewer as a way to not be consumed, right, or exoticized by the audience's gaze, exactly, right, as these black, brown, queer bodies that are normally not seen acting like this in the Huntington, or the black, brown, queer bodies that you see are, taking care of the garden or cleaning or, serving your food. So the net has also been used in other performances, most specifically this one called Ataraja. This was actually the first time I used the net in my work, is in this performance before the Cosmo Ataraja series and the video you just saw. And This performance consists of two parts. One part, there's actually a fisherfolk throwing the net into the empty space, while a narrator or an orator is telling you about this net in specific, who weaved it, how long did it take, what kind of net it is, what kind of fish it fishes. It tells you about what the net stands for. So what I told you about, food sovereignty, economic autonomy, in contrast to the dam wall, and then after kind of this information is given and delivered, the audience is invited to stand up and to hold the net with its hands, and to continue to weave the net. That's why you see some people trying to crisscross their hands with their hands. And then this picture is taken and then published immediately on social media as kind of a solidarity image with fisherfolk around the country. And specifically, this is the context of Colombia. It's been performed in Colombia. And I'm so excited because actually some of the communities I've worked with have reappropriated the performance and the score. So normally what I do with my performances, they're kind of written as scores and anyone can perform them. They have a set of instructions. So I don't need to be present to have, for the performance to get embodied. And so the communities have, in 2018, actually used it to present their cases to the Truth Commission that was established within the framework of the peace agreement that were signed between the Colombian government and the FARC guerrilla in 2016. And they presented it to the Truth Commission, which is a non-legally binding commission, but it's a commission where perpetrators and victims and survivors meet to tell the truth about what happened during the civil war in Colombia. And it functions as a space for reconciliation. However, some of the findings of the Truth Commission have triggered proper investigations and legally binding investigations. And in this case, and what it reads up here is this is how the performance Ataraja finished in the Truth Commission, obtaining or starting a dialogue to establish a route for investigation that clarifies the relationship between the armed conflict and dams in Colombia, right? Because sometimes the rhetoric that we have about the armed conflict in Colombia is that narco-traffic and coca plantations and all this idea of narco-traffic is the central and only component of our armed conflict, when the truth is that there are many, many interests over the territory, many massacres and displacements in relationships to dam construction, oil extraction, mine extraction, and that's something that happens all across Latin America, Asia, Africa. Colombia is not the only part where this happens. This is a piece that kind of is so a lot of my projects or kind of series also are open-ended and ongoing. This is a piece that is not particularly part of the Be Damned project, but that have kind of tangentially touched it in some of the images I'm going to share in a bit. But it's a piece that started I started in 2010, and it's basically collected from my female identified or family members and female identified cultural worker colleagues from Latin America or from the Latinx community here in the United States. And it was a project that stemmed out after my first visit to LA, which was in 2009. And as someone who went to art school in Bogota in the late 90s, when I came to LA for the first time, it was my first encounter with Chicano art or Latinx art. And I was so bummed out and so angry that I had not been taught any of this during my undergraduate studies in Colombia and Latin America. At that point, and I think things have changed since 2010, but when I went to school in the late 90s and all the way up to 2010, when I visited LA for the first time, and I consider myself maybe not a super nerd of the art history, but I do my research. And I had never encountered Latinx or Chicano art. And I was so angry that, instead I had been taught white dudes, basically, white dudes art. Maybe I've seen something about Ana Mendieta and that's it, but nothing. And I was so angry because a lot of the subject matter of Chicano and Latinx is so much closer to my interest as a woman from Latin America, from Bogota, as an artist, as a young artist. When I was, studying, I would have benefited so much learning about Chicano art. And so, just out of this disconnect came this idea of building my own kind of feminine, femme-oriented history of art. So all the closest Latinx identified or Latino American artists, femme identified, and then embroidered on the top are the names of artists of generations older than me that have either influenced me or that I feel that they have not had their proper attention in the art history. And so it's kind of my own, it's called Woman and Me because it's referring to the family, kind of the bloodline, but also, the ideas, I'm not only body, I'm also ideas. So also those ideas of the women who have come before me. And then these pieces are woven or in a way, stitched in a way that you can still put them on. And actually a one single panel can be used by several people at the same time. And this was an activation we did in the MASPI Museum in Sao Paulo in 2019. And the women that are activating and using the pieces with me are actually women from the movement against dams in Brazil. That's a movement that's been active for over 40 years. And we were kind of honoring and demanding justice for killed environmentalists in Brazil that, they have a very bad case, the same as Colombia. So this is another piece. And here's like the end of the performance. We had posters of some of the killed women. Marielle Franco, you may be familiar with that case. And this idea of building up genealogies is something that transverses a lot of my work. So The Woman in Me is one of those kind of genealogy works. And this one is another one. This one is called My Feminine Lineage of Environmental Struggle. And it's a collection of ballpen portraits of environmentalists, environmental activists, thinkers from all across the world. Some of them have been killed, like Berta Cáceres or Adelinda Gomez. Some of them have been legally harassed, like Winona LaDuke here. Kind of also taking advantage of, of this idea, of this exercises of portraying someone, also to learn about that struggle and that story, right? It's kind of a tool for self-education in a way. And here I want to point out amazing Francia Marquez, this Black woman over here. She is 40 years old and she's running for vice president for the leftist candidate. We have elections by the end of May in Colombia, and I'm so excited. I really hope that this that she becomes the vice president of Colombia. She was a Goldman Environmental Prize winner in 2018. So the Goldman Prize is kind of the Nobel Prize for environmentalism, and she was. She got the prize for defending the Ovejas River in her territory of Cauca from illegal mining. Another of these works that build up genealogies and that kind of touch the issue of environmental justice is this one, which is called Genealogy of Struggle, precisely. And the first time I did this one was in 2017. I was invited to present new work and to think about new work in the Vargas Museum, which is the museum of the University of Manila in Philippines, and or the University of Philippines in Manila, sorry. And then I was thinking what would be something that connected, my context of Colombia with the context of Philippines. And unfortunately, Colombia, Philippines, and Brazil for the last decade have been the three countries top of the list of places where the killing of environmentalists happened worldwide. Actually, Colombia has taken the first place for the last 2 years. It's really out of control. We now account for over 50% of those killings. And so the tree, which is based roughly on the silhouette of a ceiba tree. The ceiba tree is this Latin American tree tropical tree that's huge, has a huge canopy. The roots kind of come out of the ground. It's really like a huge grandmother. And so in the roots and the leaves and the trunk of the ceiba tree are written the names, the country, and the year of the most recent cases of killed environmentalists. This was presented last year in El Museo del Barrio in New York. And here you have 340 plus cases of people killed only in 2020 and 2021 alone. Among them, Tomarrojo Valencia, which was my mentor from the Yaqui tribe. I never thought I would actually write the name of someone that has personally, kind of be part of my life and my growth and my learning, but unfortunately it happened. And then a small altar is assembled in the front with some offerings of herbs and incense and some candles. So, the tree is kind of a way of presenting information that's very available in statistics, but when you see in statistics, it kind of leaves you cold. The fact that to think about also of them as part of a genealogy tree, understanding that these are, opening the road for our struggles, right? They are ancestors in struggle, this genealogy of struggle. I think it's important to look at, but also because the killing of environmentalists normally is not considered a statistic, or is not considered as part of what climate change and climate collapse is, right? When we think about climate collapse, we think about other statistics like the melting of the ice caps, the heating, right? Or the number of wildfires here in California. Like, there's other statistics, extinction of species, but the killing of environmentalists is normally not associated with these conversations around climate change. And I think it's important that we start incorporating them, because it actually allows us to see, in a way it's a genealogy tree, but it's also a map of sorts, because when you start seeing the countries, Colombia, Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, South Africa, Philippines, you start also understanding where are those trenches of environmental justice encroached, where are those conflicts mostly happening, and why. It's because those are the places where the most sought after common goods are located too, right? So it does give us also some tools for understanding why, where, why, because what are the resources, what are the common goods that are kind of triggering this violence against the communities. And we had the chance, and I think I'm going to wrap up with this so we can open to Q&A. In the context of the Museum of El Barrio Triennial, where we had the tree, we had the chance to also host a vigil for killed environmentalists in public space. So we could close the street and ask people to come, and we built an altar in honor of some of those killed environmentalists. And the invitation was to assist and bring something to the altar that could be compostable: flowers, fruit. Some people even brought compost from their kitchen, scraps, food scraps, whatnot. During the event, we had a chance to continue to build the altar. It got bigger. We lighted the candles at kind of sunset. We commissioned a particular tune to play, and so the musicians were playing the tune, and then a number of testimonies that were collected from different community survivors or comrades of people who have been killed were read during the event. And so holding also allowing and holding the space for communal grief, for communal thinking and processing, right? It was also last year, still in the midst of pandemic. So a lot of emotions were flowing through that event. But I'm really excited because then all the offerings, compostable offerings that we collected are being composted right now. Here, we got a donation of a compost bin, and they're being composted in this wonderful community garden called El Sitio Feliz, right there in East Harlem, very close to El Museo del Barrio, where actually in a few weeks, May 7th, Saturday, May 7th, we are gonna plant a memorial tree in this very location here on the bottom right. We're going to plant a shad bush, which is an endemic tree of the Hudson Basin, and actually gives an edible berry. You can make really nice pies with a shad bush. And this memorial tree will be a place that, of course, will mark the beginning of a long-lasting relationships with this community garden, because my idea is not to plant the tree and then disappear, but to hopefully, activate the fact that it's a memorial tree yearly or every 2 years, as I can permit myself, to activate it with a series, and to analyze what's the status, of this new violence that we are encountering under this climate collapse, which is the killing of environmentalists worldwide. So on May 7th, we will plant the tree. We'll get out the compost, kind of plant the tree using the compost that we collected during the vigil. And we will host a panel with a Colombian activist, Tatiana Roa, and 2 local activists from the Tohono O'odham Nation in Arizona, who have been have faced prison time and court cases for defending their sacred territories from the construction of the border fence. So in the United States, we don't see the killing of environmentalists, but there is some sort of killing in life, if you wish to think about it that way, because what happens is that they get legally harassed to the point of madness, right? So these 2 women had to face federal charges for their environmental activism. And so, in the panel, we will learn more about, what are the psychological, emotional, and then just actually practical consequences of having had federal charges and having had to go through a federal court case, and how that kind of imprints them forever with the scar too. So you don't get killed here in the United States, but there's other forms of harassing environmentalists here, which can be as cruel as an assassination. So I'm gonna wrap up here and then open it up for Q&A. I know there's going to be some questions channeled through.
Thank you so much, Carolina. That was really such a wonderful talk. It was super inspiring, this collapsing of poetics and politics, the centering of care, the sense of knowledge sharing. And one of the things that I kept really thinking about too was the sense of a kind of thoughtful, when you were talking about reframing this idea of field work as spiritual framework, spiritual field work, and also this idea of a water portrait, I had the sense that you were so kind of attuned to making sure there was creating a new way of working that for you was much more aligned with your philosophies, with your politics, with your way of wanting to practice in the world. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that kind of developing over time. I feel like as a student, you're taught certain kinds of methodologies, right? You're given this wide range of different disciplines to draw from, but the role of the artist is really to sort of to invent, right? And to mash up and to create these new forms. And at the same time, I also feel like there's a lot of judgment, around using terms like spiritual, for example, still, especially within a kind of academic context, right? And so I wonder if you could just talk about how that came to be. Has that been part of your practice from the get-go, or has that been something that's developed over time? And a little bit more about that kind of specificity of your methodologies, how those kind of came to form.
So I've always worked with different communities or collaboration, though I also spend a lot of time on my own in the studio. So not to say that I'm always out there, collaborating with everyone that crosses my path. No, but I take very seriously that collaboration and the moments of collaboration. And I feel that what transpires of the communities that are, generous enough to host me and to receive an artist in the midst of their struggles, is that they have informed my work in ways that the academy has not. because precisely they are at the front lines. They're always on top of stuff, and like real life is always 3 steps ahead of academy for sure. Right, in terms of political thinking, language use, right? The terms that we use today, really are stemming out of people who are on the front lines of anything, of racism, of gender conversations, of environmental conversations, right? So I always have paid a lot of attention to that, and also felt that information that I glean from that interaction is as important as any other, high-ranking text author that I read, right? And sometimes even that day-to-day interaction debunks some of the information I glean from the. So I've always been very keen to that. But I also grew up in Bogota. So Bogota is a place where I've always felt I had the right to be in public space. Like, it's very chaotic. Everything happens. A lot of the interactions with people actually happen in public space, the good ones and the bad ones, right? So you get anyway, all sorts of things happen in the street there. But to say that also there's not this fear that maybe growing up in the States, I feel a lot of people have of, like, of police brutality. Like, in Colombia, there's police brutality too, but the surveillance that you grew up with here.
Oh, I think we might be experiencing some technical difficulties. Let's hold on and see if we can get Carolina back with us. Let's give it a minute, everybody, and hopefully we can kind of resolve this technical glitch. If anybody has any questions, you can put them into the chat, and Paolo's got to copy those over so that I can help field those to Carolina. For everybody who's still watching, also wanted to make an announcement that Hyphen Labs will be joining us next Friday. That's April 15th, the same time at 1 p.m., 1 to 2, with questions fielded from about 2 to 2:30. And I hope you can join us for that second speaker in the spring series. We're going to hang in there a little longer and hope that Carolina is able to log back in and rejoin us over Zoom. I first encountered Carolina's work I think it was in the Made in LA show, the images that Carolina was showing of the nets, the Atarajas, were at one of the Made in LAs at the Hammer Museum. And I remember being completely just like really, really, really taken with them, and really felt like they were kind of conjuring this energy and the way that they held space. And there was a kind of joy and beautifulness about them, but also this unique sensibility of the objects and the material nature of them. So it's really wonderful personally, as somebody who uses materials and objects, very specific materials and objects with very specific material kind of histories, to learn more about these nets and hear Carolina speak specifically to how she kind of came across the first net and started making the Atarajas. there's a really wonderful video online. It's about 16 minutes with the MCA in Chicago, with the curator and Carolina talking about the project there, where she showed us images today, mentioning, the murals, the Serpentine book, etc. So I'll recommend everybody check out that video as well. Carolina, welcome back. You're muted for right now, though. You just need to unmute you to hear you.
Are you there?
Fantastic. Yes, we always need to remain flexible, adaptable. Anything can happen, right?
I know the Wi-Fi busted, so I'm on my phone. But good. Okay. I'm glad to jump on. I hope we didn't lose a lot of people. But anyways,
me too. I was just telling them about, there's a really wonderful video about your show at MCA Chicago. I was pointing people towards, and mentioned that I had first seen your work at the Made in LA and at the Hammer, and had seen the Atarajas, and I was like really taken back with them, and went home and looked up your work. And it was really wonderful to hear you speak a little bit about that first net, and also all of the beautiful, I'm teaching an introductory sculpture class right now, and I'm having students write about materials. And so your description of a net and in its sort of poetic and political ramifications, and how it leads our imagination, was super beautiful. And I love this idea that in your work, there's this really sense to me of conjuring things. And there's something about the nets of like catching something in the net and holding it there that really speaks to that sense of conjuring. Could you speak a little bit more about that in your work?
Yeah, I actually sometimes refer to the nets as visual spells, for sure. And I kind of allow myself to think that I'm doing a visual spell when I'm building the net, right? So I'm not normally a person that feels a lot of pleasure in the studio, in the sense that I'm dealing with hard stuff, with killings, with environmental degradation. But the Atarajas are really one of those series that bring me a lot of joy. And also because I think I'm tapping into that conjuring that you mentioned, that magical aspect, a kind of intangible aspect of making artwork, right? And that's why I firmly believe that those bottled up spells and to drive away whiteness are actually spells, and they're done with that intention. So yeah, I think also art has that capacity, right? We are under an authoritarian hex, right? Sometimes I don't have any other answer of why we are in the situation we are, and it's because there's this authoritarian hex right now, and we have to really display all our powers to fight this hex. And as visual artists, people who create images, who create meaning, and sometimes actually deconstruct oppressive images, right? Because we do that as well as artists. We need to get hold of the skills to attack from all the points possible, I think, and to fight back. So I do like to think about my work as a visual spell. Some of them, there's some films where where that is in mind completely. There's a film that it's called To Stop Being a Threat and to Become a Promise, which is a 2-channel film. And I feel like I built it, the editing is done in mind that one of the channels is casting a spell on the second channel. And the channel that's casting a spell is, all images of community, collectiveness, like healthy nature, casting a spell and kind of visually dissolving images of dam infrastructures and whatnot.
That sounds fantastic. I'm very excited to hear this kind of spell methodology woven throughout the work. I'm still kind of waiting for questions to appear in the chat, but I always have more. I mean, one of them I think is is thinking about. Well, one of my initial questions was honestly how you came to this work, maybe even speaking specifically about the Bedamned projects in terms of, if you were kind of working within a sphere of activism before then, or if a curiosity within another body of work led you to specifically this idea of dams, how that all began, and also how did you form those initial connections with communities in Colombia?
So what I said, I've always worked or by being influenced with what surrounds me and what touches me in a personal way. So a lot of my work has dealt with, like, my early work in Colombia as a student was dealing with stuff that haven't happened in public space in Colombia itself. So a lot of informal economies, processes informed my work. I was doing a lot of bartering. I was cutting hair for free in the street. So, always kind of looking for ways to contact people outside of what we would denominate the art circuit, and kind of finding space for installing and showing and having, and establishing contact with people who necessarily don't visit art museums or art spaces, also under the understanding that these are hierarchical and elitist spaces, right? So that's always been at the bottom, right? This idea of reaching out to people that normally don't have any why they should have a relationship with an artist, right? There's like no artist in their life, no art in their lives, and why not? And then when I left Colombia and became a migrant, and issues of migration started permeating my work about labor conditions. When I became a mother, issues of motherhood too. When I lived in Puerto Rico, I started learning more about, what does it feel to be a colonial subject? And so that started to permeate my work. So I've never really had to look very far, but just really let what informs me, like what I experience as a person, as a woman, as a mother, as a woman of color, in wherever context I am. And I think that when you talk from that really personal point of view, the work has a strength that otherwise it doesn't really. So that's like really, when I talk to students, is really, what are your stakes in this work or in this commentary that you're trying to make? What are your interests? How does it touch you? Like when you really speak from inside, the work has a strength and a transparency, if you wish, and it allows for the audience to feel that empathy too, and to build empathy with the work or the subject matter or the message you're trying to convey. I lived on the banks of the Magdalena River for 3 years as a teenager. My dad used to grow crops, and so the basing of the river was part of our family economy, if you wish. And when I learned that they were diverting the river, so you have to dry the riverbed to start erecting the wall of the dam, that hit home, right? It's like, though I wasn't living there anymore, I was like, how can you divert this magnificent, huge river? I couldn't, like, it didn't fit in my mind. So I just started doing research on how this happens. And then I found out people were resisting. And then I don't say by coincidence, I say actually by destiny, I think. A friend was doing activism in the region. And I learned that this person was doing activism, and Jonathan is the name of this person, Jonathan Luna, a great activist, artist, also writer, communicator, just amazing person, was doing activism against the dam. And I got in touch with him. I, recontacted him. We had known each other for years. And then he invited me to visit and to be there. So that was, but I really think that I left Colombia in 99. I'd been working and coming back, but really didn't have any stakes in Colombia. And I was longing to reconnect to Colombia. And after the years of this process and this project, I really believe that the river called me back, That's how I feel about it now. And that's what happened. The river called me back through Jonathan, through this community. And that's how I kind of weave and wiggle myself in. And then through the collaboration with those grassroots organizations, I've been very grateful that they have opened that network of affections that extends through Latin America. And that's how I've been collaborating with people in Chile, in Brazil, in Mexico, through these grassroots movements and connections that already exist and that have, I call it a network of affection, a network of care. So, I've kind of become participant of this network of care, and hopefully I've been strengthening it. Hopefully, I'd like to believe so.
Oh, thank you so much for that answer. It's so beautiful. And I love also this idea of asking ourselves, asking our students, asking each other where our stakes are and how we can build projects that move beyond interest and into investment in a different kind of way, into that kind of personal, psychic, emotional investment. Because I think the sincerity of your projects is part of what really hits me in terms of, without even knowing any of that backstory, but a sense of investment that's through and through.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And commitment, our allowance ourselves to commit to our ideas too, because the art world is so fast and so commercially driven that they expect us to have a new idea every fair, every year, a new idea. Oh, you already talked about this, already again with this. No, like commit to an idea. Commit. For me, it's ideas, not so much materials, because you can see how I kind of jump from one material medium to the other, but that's how I am. But if you're committed to a material, to an idea, like commit to that, and allow for your projects to grow, to unfold, to mutate, to to transform, right? And that's what I like about making open-ended work, or making series that have a starting point but don't have an ending point. Why?
Yeah. And this kind of feeds into a question by Paul, actually. He wrote, I'd love to hear more about your strategies for making work and actions that circulate and assert value outside of the white cube. How do you negotiate that within institutional conversations?
So I'm through trial and error, of course, but I've taken a decision that there's some things that I don't want to commercialize in my work, and those are things that I develop with the community, right? So those I've been asked, like, hey, can we print one of those Rios Vivos geochoreographies and frame it and sell it? And like, no, you can't. We cannot do that. That's a no. Why? Because that's work done with the community, by the community, for the community, and it stays there. We can share it, and but ethically I cannot allow myself to do that, and it doesn't make sense to try to to translate this into the white cube, into an art fair, into biennial or whatever. Then of course a lot of that material informs my work, and that's why, for example, the embodied knowledge, the gesture is an important part. Like, I like performance as a medium. I think it has a strength. It has a way of connecting to bodies of the audience in a way that other works doesn't. And also because our bodies are sources of knowledge. Sometimes things come out of gesture that a sculpture will, that I cannot convey through sculpture. What can I say? But that's why I've collaborated with dancers and choreographers, because then, this collaboration that then allows me to present some of these ideas within the white cube, for example, or within, a more museum, like the case of the Huntington Gardens, right? But for example, the Huntington wanted us to perform for their audience. And I said, no, we'll keep the performance for the camera, because in the moment we perform this in person, we're going to be exoticized, because we're brown, queer bodies. We're going to be exoticized by this white public. So it's kind of, I guess the more experience you have and the more trial and error and mistakes you make, you kind of start fine tuning those lines. But it's about what are those lines that you're not going to cross, even if they push you, and just saying, well, if this opportunity is lost, another one will come your way. Don't worry, another one will come your way. Or for example, the performance we did at the Maspy Museum, right? That was an opportunity for us so the pieces were part of a show. This long closed panel, they were part of the show. They're actually part of collections. So they're pieces that are, collectible. But, sometimes institutions, and that also happens, you have to read the institution. Sometimes you do have allies within the institution who are curators, public programmers, or the folks in the education department. So you also have to learn to identify those allies within the institution and conspire with them. And when you have an ally within an institution, is the best when you recognize someone on your side. It's the best, because then you're kind, I want to activate this with this series of activists, and we're going to be chanting slogans in the museum, and she's like, yes, go for it, let's do it, right? So it's also kind of recognizing those niches of opportunity when when there's an opening in the institution to do what you feel it's necessary to do, and to infiltrate those other stakeholders, right? Those people who normally don't have access to these spaces, right? Because museums, institutions, galleries are spaces to debate pressing issues of our society, right? There are spaces, right? And as an artist who is invested in these conversations, I want to hold space for these conversations to happen. So they can happen in the shape of panels, but they can happen in the shape of actions too, like we did at MASPI. So yeah, it's a question of kind of identifying those alleys and I push in until, you push until you hit the wall, but you keep on pushing until you see how far you can go.
Yeah, I like this idea maybe of the net too, of letting anything that doesn't serve you move through it, but collecting all the allies, all the potential within the net that you can use for your own purposes. Thank you for that. Paul actually had another question. You also suggested a tension between the depth of research with what can be presented in a specific work or exhibition. What do you think of as the capacity or maybe limits, if any, of this? I love that question because, yeah, within these research practices, there's so much that you could potentially include. This kind of brings to mind, how do you decide, how do you include if there are limits to that?
Well, I'm a person who is maybe very so this is from a very personal perspective, but I get very bored when I see work that presents lots of information, right? It's kind of a more 80s or 90s format, if you wish, right? Where you had, this ephemera writing, and though the information is very important, I kind of I can't concentrate on like kind of like go through all this information in an exhibition setting, because again, for me, I just, museums are elitist spaces, right? I don't know, like you need a certain, or I cannot, I'm very intolerant, and maybe I shouldn't, but I'm very intolerant of works that are so complex that you can't understand, or sometimes so self-referential to the art world that you can't access, right? I want to make work that has different entry points for a layman of audiences. So for a kid to find fun in it because it's colorful, for a fisher folk to recognize the fishing net and say, hey, or someone who has any close experience to that sort of rural lifestyle to say, oh, I recognize that's a fishing net. We used to do that when we were kids, or from a more artistic, formal perspective, people to see the sculptures and be attracted to it because they have a formal quality that allows them to access it, right? So I'm interested in making works that have different entry points for a multiplicity of audiences. My problem with, so I try to not create very dense works in the sense of presenting tons of information, because I feel that just like steers people away too, or doesn't allow for that immediate entry point. Maybe my film work may be, and there's kind of longer films that have a more documentary approach, or experimental documentary approach, where I lay out this information in a kind of more rigorous and kind of more detailed manner. So I would think my films, or maybe even the Serpent River book, is one of those pieces where this information is presented. Or even sometimes the score of the performances become very dense, but then they're short. They're like 12. So, like it's an amount of time that allows you to pay attention to these things. And because people are triggered through their bodies, they're paying attention, right? So I don't know, it's a strategy I've built up about how to present information so that people don't lose it. For example, I felt that just looking back at the vigil we had in New York, where we had the testimonies, wow, that became super long. It was like an hour long. I wish it had been shorter, for example, because we read the testimonies in English, in Spanish, some of them were audio. I could see some people drifting away, coming back in. So it was also an intimate thing. Like that happens when you're mourning also, you come in and out of it. But I don't know, it's like, I guess by experience, you start like fine tuning these decisions in a way. And then what I know that has helped me as a resource is to when I want to present more dense information, what I try to do is to program something in tandem with the show where this information can be shared. So either a panel, discussion, like for example, when we're planting the tree in May 7th in New York, that gesture of planting the tree with the compost is kind of a more poetic gesture embodiment of the message. But then we're having an hour-long panel, the same day with these three women activists from the Americas, where much more dense and information is going to be relayed from their personal experiences. So programming is also a good kind of tool to relay this kind of more detailed information.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. I have a simple question in terms of, what's next. I know that's a funny question because I feel like these are these ongoing projects that you have this investment and commitment in, but I didn't know if you had anything kind of planned in terms of, visiting particular communities or different actions within those projects, or starting new projects, or things that can be on our radar in terms of following your practice and work as well.
Yeah. So I like on the long term, let's say, the next Pacific Standard Time, PST, is art and science. We are doing a project with the Vincent Price Art Museum, which is a museum at ELAC Community College, East LA Community College. And it's kind of a unfolding of Be Damned, but I like to call it more from a place of abundance. So we've been so far with Be Damned being very critical about extractivism throughout the Americans and throughout different bioregions of the Americas. And with this project that initially in this first cycle of grants, we called the collapsing of a model. And now I'm thinking about it more as a spiral of shared dreams, of common dreams. I'm looking at what are communities doing that are resisting, and looking at examples of fair energy transition across the Americas, and trying to expand this idea of what energy transition is, not from a corporate perspective, but from a very grassroots perspective. So looking, and my brackets are the Pacific Northwest and the Tierra del Fuego in Chile. So I'm being very ambitious. But I'm looking at conservation of peat bogs in Tierra del Fuego, south of Chile, the undamming or dismantling of dams in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm doing something in Idaho this fall, and also what's happening in the Klamath River. So that's the Klamath and the Snake Rivers, who are, the Klamath is going to be undammed in the next 2-3 years, and the Snake has a political momentum to bring down their fourth dams, but that hasn't been approved. So also understanding that these dismantling of infrastructure is part of energy transition, right? Energy transition is not only about new ways of producing energy or clean energy, which is not that clean really, because we still need a lot of minerals and whatnot. But looking at, trying to broaden my understanding of what fair energy transition looks like in the Americas, from dam dismantling, conservation projects, small grid, women-led, kind of sun power grids in Puerto Rico, for example, who's actually also on the front line of colonial, and environmental climate racism, if you wish. So those are kind of my, and looking at examples of also small led community grids, very small scale energy generation in Colombia. So that's kind of hopefully I will present that in 2024 at BPAM. And I've done already some field work in the Pacific Northwest and in Chile. But I'm starting to understand that maybe this exhibition space, I needed to make it work for me and for my process. And I do not need to work for the PST in terms of their expectations. And I think what's going to work best for me is maybe to use that space and those resources to hold a meeting of sorts, where these experiences that I've been learning from can be shared in the context of the ELAC, first as a kind of academic community, and with the audience of LA, the PST audience, and then the LA audience at large too. So I'm thinking more than taking advantage of this to create new work, kind of my work. I think I wanna make it a very program heavy place, a place of encounters where I can bring the people from Chile to meet the people from Texas where I've been working, to meet the people from the Pacific Northwest, for the Colombian people to come and meet and dialogue and share knowledge.
Wow. Well, thank you for all of this knowledge sharing, and really excited to keep that on my radar. All of us here in Southern California are so happy to have you here in our community in this extended region, and to be on the lookout for that contribution to the to the greater project of PST. But that sounds really fantastic, and thank you so much for your time and all of this generous sharing today. We all really appreciate it. Really excited to hear all the conversations that follow our conversation. So thank you so much, Carolina.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.